Most people think of storytelling as this big, complicated thing. But what if I told you that you could get great at storytelling just by answering one simple question in a slightly different way? Every single day we ask one question countless of times. How are you? Now, how do most people respond? They say something like, good, how are you? Or, oh yeah, I'm good, finally the sun is out. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's a missed opportunity. If you struggle to tell interesting stories, it's not because you're bad at that, but it's because you haven't had enough repetitions. So, what is the solution? Anytime that someone asks you, how are you? Share a tiny story that shows a little bit more about you as a human. But let me give you an example. Actually, today a friend asked me, how are you? This is how I responded. I'm good, but actually, this morning I had this little weird moment. This morning I was interviewing this guy for my YouTube channel, like this speaker that I admire. And before the interview I was fine, but the moment that he popped up on screen, I was like, oh man, this guy is so good. Like, he speaks much better, much more eloquent than me. And so immediately my mind just started going crazy. Anyway, what about you? When was the last time that you got a little bit more nervous, and how did you actually handle that? Did you see? It wasn't like a super polished story, it wasn't crazy, just a tiny story. But there are actually a few things that you want to keep in mind. First tip, share relatable moments. Now, oftentimes we want to share those big moments like a life-changing car accident, whatever it is. Like, don't do that. Share those small relatable moments, something that show a little bit more about you as a human. For example, has there been anything interesting that has happened lately? Have you maybe picked up this new skill that is interesting to share? Or is there this small thing that annoys you, but it's still kind of funny to share? Those are the moments that you want to share. But that's really anything that is not the weather or traffic. Second tip, share short stories. Sure, there is a time and place for longer stories, but not here. If someone asks you, how are you? And you start with this 5-minute life-changing story, that obviously is way too much. So you want to share this 30-second story, maybe a 60-second story if it's that incredible story, but keep it there. Actually, on that note, I'm curious. If someone were to ask you today, how are you? How would you respond? Let me know in the comments with your short story. Third tip, ask the right question. Now, that exercise is not only about you sharing a story, but it's about making the other person comfortable to share a story in return. Now, how do you do that? By asking the right question. By asking a question that gets a story in return. So for example, if you talk about a fun trip, well then ask the other person, hey, what about you? What has been your most fun trip this year? Or for example, if you talk about spending a weekend with your family, well then ask them, what about you? When was the last time that you spent some time with your family? Do you see? Like, ask a question that gets a story in return. If you want to become the best storyteller in the shortest time possible, tell those tiny stories anytime that someone asks you, how are you? But hey, once you've then put in a few repetitions, you then at one point want to make sure that you also tell more interesting stories. And for that, you may want to check out the next video in which I share some of my favorite storytelling techniques. Enjoy.